The autumn of 2016 started like any other for the Brennan family, but it would end in a way that would haunt everyone who knew them for years to come. Derek, Justin, and Kyle Brennan had been planning their annual mountain hiking trip for months, a tradition they had maintained religiously for over a decade. The three brothers, aged 35, 33, and 30 respectively, had grown up exploring the wilderness together, and these yearly adventures were more than just recreation. They were a sacred bond that kept them connected despite their busy adult lives. Derek worked as a construction supervisor in Denver, Justin ran a small auto repair shop in Colorado Springs, and Kyle taught high school mathematics in Boulder. Despite living in different cities and leading separate lives, the brothers made sure to carve out time each fall for their mountain expedition. This particular year they had chosen the rugged terrain of the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado, specifically targeting a remote area near the Weminish Wilderness. The region was known for its challenging trails, unpredictable weather, and stunning alpine scenery. It was exactly the kind of adventure the Brennan brothers craved, far from civilization, demanding both physical and mental toughness, and offering the kind of natural beauty that reminded them why they had fallen in love with the outdoors in the first place. They had researched the area extensively, studying topographical maps, weather patterns, and trail conditions. Their plan was ambitious but not reckless, a 5-day trek through some of the most pristine wilderness Colorado had to offer. The brothers met at Derek's house in Denver on October 15th, a crisp Friday morning with the promise of clear skies ahead. Their gear was meticulously organized, sleeping bags rated for sub-freezing temperatures, portable camp stoves, first aid supplies, GPS units, emergency beacons, and enough food for a week. They had learned from years of experience that preparation was everything in the mountains. Kyle, the youngest and arguably the most cautious of the three, had insisted on bringing extra batteries for their electronic devices and additional emergency supplies. Justin, the middle brother and self-proclaimed comedian of the group, had packed his usual assortment of terrible jokes and puns that he claimed were essential for morale. Derek, as the eldest and natural leader, had taken responsibility for route planning and emergency protocols. Their plan was straightforward: drive to the trailhead near Silverton, Colorado, hike into the wilderness along established trails, then venture into more remote areas where few people traveled. They intended to summit several peaks, camp in pristine alpine meadows, and return to their vehicle by the following Tuesday. It was the kind of trip they had done dozens of times before, though never in this particular area. The weather forecast was favorable, with clear skies predicted for the first 3 days and only a slight chance of snow showers toward the end of their journey. October weather in the high country could be unpredictable, but they felt confident in their abilities and preparation. The drive to the trailhead took nearly 4 hours, winding through mountain roads that grew progressively narrower and more remote. They stopped for lunch in the small town of Silverton, population less than 600, where they checked in with local authorities and filed their backcountry camping permits. The ranger station clerk, an older woman named Beth who had worked there for over 20 years, reviewed their planned route and offered some local insights about current trail conditions. She mentioned that early season snow had already fallen at higher elevations, making some passes potentially treacherous, and advised them to be extra cautious about weather changes. The brothers assured her they were experienced and well prepared, providing her with their detailed itinerary and emergency contact information. As they loaded their backpacks at the trailhead, the excitement was palpable. The parking area was nearly empty, just their vehicle and one other car belonging to day hikers who had already returned. The solitude was exactly what they had hoped for. The trail began gently, winding through dense stands of aspen and spruce trees that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. Golden leaves carpeted the forest floor, and the air carried the crisp, clean scent of high-altitude wilderness. For the first few hours, conversation flowed easily between the brothers as they found their hiking rhythm and began to leave the stresses of their daily lives behind. Kyle documented their progress with his camera, a hobby he had picked up in recent years. He captured images of the changing landscape, the interplay of light and shadow through the forest canopy, and candid shots of his brothers as they navigated the trail. These photographs would later become precious evidence of their final adventure together. Derek maintained a steady pace at the front, occasionally consulting his map and GPS unit to confirm their position. Justin entertained them with stories from his shop, regaling them with tales of difficult customers and impossible repair jobs that somehow always seemed to work out in the end. By late afternoon they had reached their planned first campsite, a small clearing beside a mountain stream at about 10,000 feet elevation. The site offered spectacular views of the surrounding peaks and valleys, with the sound of rushing water providing a natural soundtrack for their evening. They established their camp with practiced efficiency, Derek and Kyle setting up the tents while Justin gathered firewood and prepared their dinner. As darkness fell, they sat around their small campfire, sharing stories and planning the next day's route. The temperature dropped steadily and they could see their breath in the firelight, but their spirits remained high. The first night passed peacefully. They woke before dawn to clear skies and temperatures well below freezing. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, they broke camp and continued deeper into the wilderness. The trail became more challenging as they gained elevation, with steeper grades and rockier terrain. By midday they had climbed above the tree line into the alpine zone, where the landscape opened up into vast expanses of rock, grass, and scattered wildflowers. The views were breathtaking, jagged peaks stretching to the horizon in every direction, their summits dusted with fresh snow that glittered in the sunshine. It was during this second day that they made the decision that would change everything. About 3 miles off their planned route, Derek spotted what appeared to be an interesting geological formation through his binoculars, a series of rocky outcroppings that suggested the presence of caves or natural shelters. The formation was located on the far side of a broad valley, requiring a significant detour from their intended path. Kyle was initially hesitant about the deviation, concerned about the additional time and energy it would require. Justin was characteristically easygoing about the change, viewing it as an opportunity for adventure. Derek, whose curiosity had been sparked by the unusual rock formations, argued persuasively that they had plenty of time and supplies to investigate. After some discussion, they agreed to make the detour. The decision seemed reasonable at the time. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped, and had filed a detailed itinerary that included some flexibility for exploration. The formation was perhaps 2 hours away at most, and they could easily return to their main route afterward. They marked their position carefully on the map, took compass bearings, and began the descent into the valley. None of them could have imagined that this simple decision to investigate an interesting geological feature would trigger a chain of events that would tear their family apart and create one of the most puzzling missing persons cases in Colorado history. The descent into the valley proved more challenging than any of them had anticipated. What had appeared from a distance to be a gentle slope revealed itself as a series of steep, rocky terraces separated by loose scree fields that shifted dangerously underfoot. Derek led the way, testing each step carefully before committing his full weight. Behind him, Justin and Kyle followed single file, their hiking poles clicking against the stones as they maintained their balance on the unstable surface. The rock formation that had caught Derek's attention from the ridge seemed to grow larger and more imposing as they approached, revealing details that had been invisible from their previous vantage point. As they drew closer, it became clear that the formation was not simply an interesting geological feature but rather a complex system of limestone cliffs riddled with caves and crevices. The rock face rose nearly 200 feet above the valley floor, its surface weathered and carved by countless centuries of wind, water, and freezing temperatures. Dark openings of various sizes dotted the cliff face, some barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, others gaping wide like open mouths waiting to swallow unwary explorers. The brothers paused at the base of the formation, craning their necks upward to take in the full scope of what they had discovered. Kyle was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "This place is incredible," he said, his voice echoing slightly off the rock walls. "I had no idea there were cave systems like this in the area." He pulled out his camera and began documenting the formation, capturing the play of light and shadow across the limestone surface. The photographs would later prove invaluable to search and rescue teams, though at the moment they seemed like nothing more than souvenirs of an unexpected discovery. Justin approached one of the larger cave openings, peering into the darkness beyond. "Think these go very deep?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of excitement. Cool air flowed from the cave mouth, carrying with it the musty scent of ancient rock and underground spaces. Derek consulted his topographical map, trying to determine if the cave system was marked, but found no indication of its existence on any of their charts. This was not uncommon in such remote areas, where many natural features remained unmapped and unexplored. After some discussion, they decided to investigate the largest and most accessible cave opening. Derek emphasized the importance of safety protocols. They would stay together, mark their route carefully, and venture only as far as their flashlight beams could safely guide them. None of them were experienced cavers, but their years of wilderness exploration had taught them the fundamentals of moving safely through unfamiliar terrain. They secured their backpacks just inside the cave entrance, keeping only essential items like flashlights, water, and emergency supplies. The cave entrance led to a spacious chamber approximately 20 feet wide and 30 feet deep, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above their heads. The floor was covered with a mixture of sand, small rocks, and what appeared to be debris that had blown in over the years. Their flashlight beams revealed interesting rock formations along the walls, flowstone deposits, small stalactites, and mineral stains that created abstract patterns across the limestone surface. At the far end of the chamber, they discovered a narrow passage that seemed to continue deeper into the mountain. Derek checked his watch and noted that they had been exploring for nearly an hour. The passage ahead looked promising but also potentially dangerous, disappearing around a bend where their lights could not penetrate. After brief consultation, they decided to venture a short distance into the passage to see what lay beyond. The opening was wide enough for them to walk upright, though they had to move single file. Derek led the way, sweeping his flashlight beam back and forth to illuminate the path ahead. The passage continued for roughly 50 feet before opening into another chamber, this one smaller than the first but featuring what appeared to be multiple branching tunnels leading in different directions. The brothers stood at the junction, their lights playing across the various openings, each seeming to beckon them toward different mysteries. The air was noticeably cooler here, and they could hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. Kyle suggested they mark their route with small rock cairns to ensure they could find their way back, a precaution that proved wise given the complexity of the cave system. They chose the largest tunnel, which angled gradually downward into the heart of the mountain. The passage was remarkably stable, with few loose rocks or unstable sections that might pose hazards to careful explorers. As they progressed deeper, they began to notice strange formations in the rock, what appeared to be fossilized remains of ancient sea creatures, evidence that this high mountain region had once been covered by prehistoric oceans. Kyle was fascinated by these discoveries, stopping frequently to photograph interesting specimens with his camera's flash. It was Justin who first noticed the sound. They had been underground for over 2 hours, moving through increasingly complex passages, when he called for the group to stop and listen. At first, there was only the familiar drip of water and the soft echo of their own breathing, but gradually they became aware of a low, rhythmic noise that seemed to come from somewhere ahead of them in the darkness. The sound was difficult to describe, not quite mechanical but too regular to be entirely natural. Derek suggested it might be an underground stream flowing over rocks, a common phenomenon in limestone cave systems. Curious about the source of the sound, they continued deeper into the mountain. The passage began to slope more steeply downward, and they noticed that the air was becoming noticeably warmer despite their increasing distance from the surface. Their flashlight beams revealed that the tunnel walls were becoming smoother, almost polished in appearance, as if shaped by forces other than simple water erosion. Strange mineral deposits created colorful streaks across the rock surfaces, and in several places they found formations that seemed almost too regular and geometric to be entirely natural. The sound grew louder as they progressed, resolving into what could only be described as a deep, pulsing rhythm that seemed to emanate from the very walls around them. Kyle suggested that they might be approaching an underground river or perhaps a chamber with unusual acoustic properties that amplified natural water sounds. Derek remained focused on navigation, carefully marking their route and checking his compass to maintain their sense of direction in the winding passages. After another hour of exploration, they reached a point where the passage opened into what their lights suggested was a much larger space. The sound was now clearly audible, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to come from all directions at once. Derek's flashlight beam failed to reach the far walls of the chamber, suggesting it was significantly larger than anything they had encountered so far. As they entered the space, their voices took on a strange quality, as if the acoustics of the chamber were somehow different from normal cave environments. It was then that Kyle's camera flash illuminated something that made them all freeze in place. Along the far wall of the chamber, barely visible in the edge of their light beams, were what appeared to be geometric shapes carved into the rock face. The markings were clearly artificial, too regular and purposeful to be natural formations. Derek approached the wall with his flashlight, revealing a complex series of symbols and patterns that seemed to have been carved with sophisticated tools. The craftsmanship was remarkable, with clean lines and precise angles that suggested considerable skill and planning. Justin voiced what they were all thinking: who could have made these? And how long ago? The symbols bore no resemblance to any Native American petroglyphs they were familiar with, nor did they match any historical markings they had encountered in their years of wilderness exploration. The chamber itself seemed impossibly old, with no obvious access routes other than the passage they had used to enter. The implications were staggering. They had apparently discovered evidence of ancient human activity in a location that should have been inaccessible to primitive tools and techniques. As they examined the carvings more closely, the strange pulsing sound began to change, becoming more rapid and intense. The brothers looked at each other with growing unease, suddenly aware of how isolated they were from the outside world and how little anyone knew about their current location. The pulsing sound continued to intensify as the brothers stood transfixed before the ancient carvings. Derek swept his flashlight beam across the wall, revealing more intricate symbols that seemed to extend far beyond what they had initially discovered. The patterns appeared to tell some kind of story, with recurring motifs and what looked like directional indicators pointing deeper into the cave system. Kyle raised his camera to document the findings, but when the flash fired, something extraordinary happened. For a brief moment, the symbols seemed to glow with their own internal light, pulsing in rhythm with the mysterious sound that filled the chamber. "Did you guys see that?" Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic pulsing. Derek and Justin nodded, both having witnessed the same phenomenon. The rational part of their minds searched for explanations. Perhaps the symbols contained phosphorescent minerals that reacted to the camera flash, or maybe the limestone contained compounds that reflected light in unusual ways. But deep down, all three brothers sensed they were experiencing something far beyond their understanding of normal geology or archaeology. Justin approached a different section of the wall, running his fingers along the carved grooves. The stone felt warm to the touch, almost alive, and he could swear he felt a subtle vibration through his fingertips. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "How can rock formations be generating sound and heat?" Derek joined him at the wall, pressing his palm against the carved surface. He immediately pulled his hand back, startled by the warmth and the unmistakable sensation of energy flowing through the stone. As they examined the chamber more thoroughly, they discovered that the carvings were not limited to a single wall. Symbols and patterns covered virtually every surface, creating an elaborate network of interconnected designs that seemed to flow and merge throughout the entire space. Some sections appeared to be maps or diagrams, with lines connecting various points and symbols. Others looked like written text in an unknown language, with characters that resembled no alphabet any of them had ever seen. The pulsing sound began to change again, developing a more complex rhythm that almost resembled music or language. Kyle found himself listening intently, trying to detect patterns or meaning in the strange cadence. There was something hypnotic about the sound, something that seemed to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to a deeper part of his mind. Derek noticed his brother's intense focus and placed a hand on his shoulder, breaking the spell. "We should probably think about heading back," Derek suggested, checking his watch. They had been underground for nearly 4 hours, much longer than originally planned. Their families would be expecting them to check in via satellite phone by evening, and they still had a significant hike back to their planned campsite. But as he spoke, they heard a new sound coming from the direction they had entered, a deep rumbling that seemed to shake the entire cave system. The brothers looked at each other with growing alarm as the rumbling intensified. Dust began to fall from the ceiling, and small rocks scattered across the chamber floor. "Earthquake?" Justin asked, but the shaking felt different from any natural seismic activity they had experienced. The vibrations seemed to be coming from within the cave system itself rather than from the Earth's crust. Derek immediately began moving toward the passage they had used to enter, motioning for his brothers to follow. But as they reached the entrance to the passage, they discovered their worst nightmare. Where the tunnel had been open and accessible just hours before, they now found their path blocked by a massive pile of fallen rock. The rumbling had apparently triggered a cave-in that sealed their primary exit route. Derek played his flashlight beam across the debris pile, searching desperately for gaps or spaces they might be able to clear, but the blockage appeared complete and insurmountable. "There has to be another way out," Kyle said, trying to keep panic from creeping into his voice. They had noticed several other passages leading from the main chamber, and it was possible that one of them might connect to the surface or to another part of the cave system that remained accessible. Derek agreed, suggesting they explore the remaining tunnels systematically while conserving their flashlight batteries and remaining calm. They began with the passage that seemed to angle upward, reasoning that any route to the surface would likely involve climbing rather than descending deeper into the mountain. This tunnel was narrower than the one they had used to reach the chamber, requiring them to move in single file and occasionally crawl through tight spaces. After 30 minutes of careful progress, they reached a dead end where the passage simply terminated in solid rock. The second passage led downward at a steep angle, disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. The air flowing from this tunnel was noticeably warmer and carried strange odors, not unpleasant, but unlike anything they had encountered in normal cave environments. Derek was reluctant to venture into a passage that led further from the surface, but they agreed to explore it briefly in case it connected to other parts of the system. If you're finding this story as captivating as we are, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest mysterious tales and unexplained disappearances that have baffled investigators for years. After descending for nearly an hour, they found themselves in another large chamber, this one featuring what appeared to be a small underground lake. The water was perfectly still and so clear they could see the bottom despite its considerable depth. But it was what they found around the lake that truly shocked them. Scattered along the shoreline were objects that clearly did not belong in a natural cave environment. Pieces of metal that looked like tools or equipment, fragments of what might have been clothing or fabric, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be human bones. Kyle knelt beside one of the bone fragments, his hands shaking as he examined what looked like part of a human femur. The bone was old, weathered by time and the cave environment, but clearly not ancient. Derek found pieces of what looked like modern camping equipment. A torn piece of nylon fabric that might have been part of a tent or sleeping bag, a broken plastic buckle from a backpack strap, and a corroded metal camping cup. "Someone else has been here," Justin said quietly. "Someone else got trapped just like us." The implications were terrifying. If other explorers had found their way into this cave system and never made it out, what chance did the three brothers have? Derek tried to remain optimistic, pointing out that they were better prepared and more experienced than casual explorers might have been. But privately he was beginning to worry about their situation. They spent several more hours exploring additional passages, each one leading to dead ends or chambers that offered no obvious route to the surface. Their flashlight batteries were beginning to weaken, and they had consumed most of their water supplies. The strange pulsing sound had never stopped, continuing its hypnotic rhythm that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. Kyle found himself drawn to the sound, often stopping to listen intently while his brothers called his name to get his attention. As night fell somewhere far above them on the surface, the brothers gathered in the main chamber to assess their situation. They had enough food for perhaps 2 more days if they rationed carefully, and their remaining water would last only until the following evening. Derek's emergency beacon had no signal in the underground environment, and their satellite phone was equally useless surrounded by hundreds of feet of solid rock. "We need to conserve our energy and supplies," Derek said, trying to project leadership and calm despite his growing concern. "Tomorrow we'll explore the remaining passages more systematically. There has to be a way out we haven't found yet." But even as he spoke, he noticed that Kyle seemed to be paying less attention to their planning and more attention to the mysterious sounds echoing through the chamber. The ancient symbols on the walls seemed to glow more brightly in the darkness, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the rhythmic sounds. Kyle found himself staring at the patterns, feeling as if they were trying to communicate something important, something that might be the key to their escape. But the harder he tried to understand the meaning, the more confused and disoriented he became. The first night in the cave passed restlessly for all three brothers. They had arranged their sleeping bags in the main chamber near the carved walls, hoping that staying together would provide both warmth and psychological comfort. But sleep proved elusive as the rhythmic pulsing continued throughout the darkness, sometimes growing louder, sometimes fading to barely audible levels, but never completely stopping. Derek found himself checking his watch repeatedly, though time seemed to have lost all meaning in the unchanging environment of the underground chamber. Kyle's behavior had become increasingly concerning as the hours passed. He lay on his sleeping bag staring up at the carved ceiling, occasionally mumbling words that his brothers couldn't quite understand. When Derek tried to engage him in conversation about their escape plans, Kyle would respond briefly before his attention drifted back to the symbols surrounding them. The strange glow from the carvings seemed to intensify whenever Kyle looked directly at them, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across his face. Justin tried to lighten the mood with his usual jokes and stories, but his heart wasn't in it. The discovery of human remains and modern camping equipment in the lower chamber had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He kept thinking about the families of whoever those bones had belonged to, wondering if they had searched desperately for their missing loved ones just as the Brennan family would soon be doing. The thought of his own family going through that kind of anguish made his stomach clench with anxiety. When morning light should have been breaking somewhere far above them on the surface, the brothers woke to the same eternal twilight of their underground prison. Derek's watch showed that they had been missing from their planned route for over 18 hours. By now their absence would have been noticed. Their detailed itinerary called for them to check in via satellite phone the previous evening, and their failure to make contact would have triggered search protocols. Derek tried to calculate how long it might take rescue teams to locate them. The problem was that their actual position bore no resemblance to their filed hiking plan. They had deviated from their intended route to explore the cave system, and even if search teams found their abandoned backpacks at the cave entrance, there was no guarantee that rescuers would venture deep enough into the cave system to reach their current location. The collapsed passage that had trapped them was not visible from the main entrance, making it unlikely that searchers would realize they were dealing with a cave-in situation. Their second day of exploration yielded no better results than the first. Derek and Justin systematically investigated every passage they could find, mapping their routes carefully to avoid getting lost in the maze-like system. Some tunnels led to chambers filled with impressive geological formations but no exits. Others narrowed to crawl spaces that were too dangerous to navigate without proper caving equipment. One particularly promising passage seemed to angle upward toward the surface, but after 3 hours of climbing through increasingly tight spaces, it terminated in a chimney that was too narrow and unstable to climb. Kyle accompanied them on these explorations, but his participation became increasingly passive. He would follow where they led but rarely offered suggestions or observations. His attention remained focused on the mysterious sounds and the ancient symbols that seemed to be everywhere once you knew what to look for. Even in passages far from the main chamber, they discovered carved markings on the walls, not as elaborate as the central collection, but clearly part of the same system. During a rest break in one of the smaller chambers, Justin noticed that Kyle was tracing the wall carvings with his finger, following the lines and curves as if reading text in a familiar language. When Justin asked what he was doing, Kyle looked up with an expression of confusion and surprise, as if he had been unaware of his own actions. "I don't know," he said quietly. "It just feels like they're trying to tell me something important." Derek was becoming increasingly worried about Kyle's mental state. The stress of their situation, combined with sleep deprivation and the strange environmental factors of the cave, seemed to be affecting his youngest brother more severely than the rest of them. Derek had read about cases where prolonged exposure to certain geological formations could cause hallucinations or disorientation, and he wondered if they were dealing with something similar. By their third day underground, their water supplies were critically low, and their food was nearly exhausted. Derek made the difficult decision to ration their remaining provisions strictly, giving them perhaps one more day before dehydration became a serious threat. The temperature in the cave remained constant, which helped conserve their energy, but the psychological strain of their situation was becoming harder to manage. It was during this third day that Kyle began to show signs of what Derek could only describe as communication with the cave itself. Kyle would stand before certain sections of carved wall and seem to listen intently, occasionally nodding as if responding to unheard voices. When his brothers questioned him about this behavior, Kyle insisted that the symbols were becoming clearer to him, that he was beginning to understand their meaning. "They're not just decorations," Kyle explained, his eyes bright with an intensity that worried his brothers. "They're instructions. Maps. They show the way through the mountain, but not the way we've been looking for." He pointed to a complex series of interconnected symbols. "This isn't about finding a passage to the surface. It's about going deeper, following the path that the builders intended." Derek tried to reason with his brother, explaining that going deeper into the mountain would only make their situation worse. They needed to find a way up and out, not further into the earth. But Kyle seemed convinced that the conventional approach was wrong, that the cave system operated according to different rules that only he was beginning to understand. That night, as Derek and Justin tried to plan their next day's search efforts, Kyle announced that he had figured out where they needed to go. He pointed to a passage they had dismissed earlier because it led steeply downward into what appeared to be the deepest part of the cave system. "That's the path," he said with absolute certainty. "The symbols show the way. We have to trust the builders." Derek refused to consider Kyle's suggestion, pointing out that their survival depended on finding an exit to the surface, not exploring deeper into the mountain. But Kyle's insistence grew more adamant throughout the evening. He claimed that the pulsing sounds were actually a form of guidance system, leading them towards something important that would solve their problems. Justin tried to support Derek's position while remaining gentle with Kyle, but their youngest brother seemed increasingly disconnected from their shared reality. The situation came to a head during their fourth night underground. Derek woke to find Kyle's sleeping bag empty. Using his failing flashlight, he searched the immediate area and discovered Kyle standing before the main wall of carvings, his hands pressed against the stone surface. Kyle's eyes were closed, and he was swaying slightly in rhythm with the pulsing sounds that filled the chamber. "Are you as intrigued by this mysterious cave system as the Brennan brothers were? There are countless unexplored places on our planet hiding secrets that could change everything we think we know about human history and the natural world." "Kyle," Derek called softly, not wanting to startle his brother. But Kyle didn't respond. Derek approached carefully and placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. To his shock, Kyle's skin was warm to the touch, almost feverish, and Derek could feel a subtle vibration running through his brother's body. When Kyle finally opened his eyes, they seemed to glow with the same strange light that emanated from the carved symbols. "I understand now," Kyle said, his voice carrying an odd echo. "They're not gone. The builders. They're still here, waiting for someone who can hear them properly. They've been calling for so long, but no one listened until now." Derek felt a chill of fear as he looked into his brother's eyes and saw something that was no longer entirely familiar. Justin joined them, having been awakened by their voices. Together, the older brothers tried to convince Kyle to return to his sleeping bag and rest, but Kyle insisted that rest was no longer necessary. He claimed that the builders were sharing their energy with him, sustaining him in ways that normal food and water could not. The claim was obviously impossible, but Kyle did seem more energetic and alert than he had any right to be given their circumstances. As dawn broke somewhere in the world above them, marking their fifth day in the cave system, Derek made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He announced that they would split up for the day's search efforts. He and Justin would explore the upper passages one final time, using their remaining energy for a desperate attempt to find an exit. Kyle, meanwhile, could investigate his theory about the deeper passages, but only for a limited time and only if he promised to return to the main chamber by evening. Looking back, Derek would realize that this decision was influenced by exhaustion, desperation, and the subtle effects of whatever force was affecting the cave environment. Under normal circumstances, he would never have agreed to separate the group. But Kyle's insistence was wearing down their resistance, and they were running out of options for conventional escape routes. Kyle eagerly agreed to the plan, promising to be careful and to return with news of what he found in the deeper passages. As Derek and Justin prepared for what they both knew might be their final attempt to reach the surface, Kyle gathered his remaining supplies and headed toward the downward passage with an energy and purpose that seemed impossible given their dire circumstances. Derek and Justin spent their final day exploring every remaining passage in the upper levels of the cave system, driven by a desperation that lent strength to their exhausted bodies. Their flashlights were nearly dead, reduced to dim yellow beams that barely penetrated the darkness ahead. They had consumed their last water the previous evening, and their lips were cracked from dehydration. Yet they pressed on, checking and rechecking passages they had already explored, hoping against hope that they had missed something crucial in their earlier searches. By late afternoon, they had to accept the devastating truth: there was no way out through the upper levels. Every passage they had found either terminated in solid rock, narrowed to impassable crawl spaces, or had been blocked by the same cave-in that had sealed their original entrance. Their situation was hopeless, and they both knew it. They made their way back to the main chamber to wait for Kyle's return, each lost in private thoughts about the families they would never see again and the dreams they would never fulfill. Kyle did not return that evening. As the hours passed, Derek and Justin called his name repeatedly, their voices echoing through the passage he had taken into the deeper levels of the cave system. But there was no response, only the eternal pulsing sound that had become the soundtrack of their underground prison. By midnight, they had to face the possibility that Kyle was lost, injured, or worse. Derek blamed himself for allowing the separation, while Justin struggled with guilt over not insisting that Kyle abandon his obsession with the deeper passages. Their sixth day underground dawned with the same artificial twilight they had grown to hate. Derek and Justin were now critically dehydrated, their bodies beginning to shut down from lack of water and nutrition. The carved symbols on the walls seemed to pulse more brightly than ever, and both brothers found themselves staring at the patterns despite their exhaustion. The hypnotic quality of the carvings was undeniable, and they began to understand how Kyle had become so fascinated by them. It was during this sixth day that Derek made his final entry in the small notebook he had been carrying. His handwriting was shaky and weak, but his words were clear. Kyle went deeper yesterday morning. Justin and I are too weak to follow. Water gone. Food gone. If anyone finds this, tell our families we love them. The cave is not what it seems. The symbols are real. Kyle understood something we couldn't. Don't let anyone else come here alone. Justin found the strength to add his own message. We should never have split up. Kyle was right about the sounds and the symbols, but we were too scared to believe him. The cave changes people. Changes how they think. If Kyle made it out, listen to his story. There are things in the world we don't understand. On the seventh day, neither brother had the strength to write. They lay side by side in the main chamber, their backs against the carved wall, watching the symbols pulse with that strange internal light. The pulsing sounds had become their world, a rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with their own failing life signs. Derek reached out and took Justin's hand, finding comfort in the human connection as they faced their final hours together. Their deaths, when they came, were peaceful. Dehydration and exhaustion simply carried them away during what should have been their seventh night underground. They remained seated against the cave wall, their camping gear scattered around them, their bodies preserved by the cool, dry conditions of the cave environment. The strange energy that permeated the chamber seemed to protect them from normal decay, leaving them as they had been in life, simply waiting for someone to find them. Kyle emerged from the cave system exactly 2 years later, on October 23, 2018. He appeared at a ranger station nearly 40 miles from where he had originally entered the cave, wearing clothes that were dirty and faded but not the tattered rags one would expect after 2 years in underground conditions. He was thin but not emaciated, alert but strangely calm, and when rangers asked him where he had been for the past 2 years, his answer defied all logic and understanding. "I was learning," Kyle said simply. "The builders have been teaching me. They've been waiting so long for someone who could understand their messages, someone who could help them complete their work." His words made no sense to the rangers, but medical examination revealed that while Kyle was understandably malnourished and dehydrated, his condition was far better than anyone who had survived 2 years in a cave environment should have been. The search for Derek and Justin began immediately. Kyle provided detailed directions to the cave system, though he insisted that the entrance he had used to return to the surface was different from the one they had originally discovered. Search and rescue teams found the original cave entrance within hours, along with the brothers' abandoned backpacks. Kyle's description of the internal layout proved remarkably accurate, allowing teams to navigate the complex passage system despite the dangerous conditions. They found Derek and Justin exactly where Kyle said they would be, in the main chamber with the carved walls. The brothers' bodies were seated against the cave wall, their clothing dirty and faded but intact, their camping gear scattered around them just as Kyle had described. There was no evidence of violence or trauma. They had simply succumbed to the conditions of their underground imprisonment. The medical examiner determined that they had died approximately 2 years earlier, shortly after entering the cave system. But it was the carved symbols that truly baffled investigators. The intricate patterns Kyle had described covered virtually every surface of the chamber, displaying a level of sophistication that seemed impossible for primitive tools to have created. Geologists and archaeologists who examined the carvings could not determine their age or origin. The symbols bore no resemblance to any known indigenous art forms, and their geometric precision suggested advanced mathematical understanding. Kyle's account of his 2-year experience underground became one of the most controversial missing person stories in Colorado history. He claimed that after separating from his brothers, he had followed the deeper passages to chambers far below the main cave system. There, he insisted, he had encountered the builders, beings of immense age and wisdom who had created the cave system as a kind of school or library for those capable of understanding their teachings. According to Kyle, the builders existed in a state between physical and energy form, sustained by the geological forces deep within the mountain. They had been waiting for millennia for someone with the right mental frequency to receive their knowledge, someone who could serve as a bridge between their ancient civilization and the modern world. The pulsing sounds and glowing symbols were their teaching tools, methods of direct knowledge transfer that bypassed normal human learning processes. If you're captivated by stories of missing time and impossible survival like Kyle Brennan's, you'll want to subscribe to our channel for more real-life mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about human limits and unexplained phenomena. Kyle described learning about advanced mathematics, physics, and engineering principles that were far beyond current human understanding. The builders had shown him visions of Earth's ancient past, times when their civilization had flourished before cataclysmic changes forced them to retreat into deep underground refuges. They had chosen him to carry their knowledge back to the surface world, to prepare humanity for changes that were coming in the near future. Most disturbing was Kyle's explanation for his brothers' deaths. He claimed that Derek and Justin had been offered the same opportunity to learn from the builders, but their fear and skepticism had made them incompatible with the teaching process. The builders could sustain those who were receptive to their knowledge, providing energy and nourishment through direct neural interface. But those who resisted or could not adapt to the process would inevitably succumb to the normal limitations of human biology. Kyle insisted that his brothers had not died in vain. Their presence in the cave system had been necessary to guide him to the deeper levels where the real teaching took place. In the builder's cosmic perspective, individual human lives were brief moments in a much larger pattern of existence. Derek and Justin had fulfilled their purpose by bringing Kyle to the place where he could receive the knowledge that would benefit all of humanity. The scientific community rejected Kyle's account entirely, attributing his survival to unknown water sources within the cave system and his elaborate story to psychological trauma and extended isolation. Psychologists suggested that his detailed descriptions of the builders and their teachings were elaborate hallucinations created by his mind to cope with the horror of watching his brothers die and spending 2 years alone underground. But several aspects of Kyle's story resisted easy explanation. His knowledge of the cave system's layout was perfect, including chambers and passages that had not been mapped by the initial search teams. He demonstrated mathematical and scientific understanding that far exceeded his previous education as a high school teacher. Most puzzling, he seemed to have aged normally during his 2-year absence, showing none of the premature aging or health deterioration that prolonged malnutrition and stress typically caused. The cave system was sealed permanently after the recovery of Derek and Justin's remains. Official reports cited safety concerns and the unstable nature of the underground passages, but rumors persisted that authorities had discovered things in the deeper levels that they preferred to keep hidden from public knowledge. Kyle cooperated fully with all investigations, submitting to extensive medical and psychological testing, but his story never changed in any significant details. Kyle returned to his teaching job in Boulder, though his colleagues noted significant changes in his personality and abilities. He seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of advanced mathematical concepts that amazed his fellow teachers and inspired his students. He began writing papers on theoretical physics and ancient history that, while dismissed by mainstream academics, attracted attention from fringe researchers and alternative science communities. The Brennan family struggled to make sense of their loss and Kyle's incredible story. Derek's wife and children found some comfort in the knowledge that he had died trying to escape rather than suffering alone, but they could never fully accept Kyle's explanation for his own survival. Justin's parents spent years researching cave survival and underground water sources, hoping to find rational explanations for Kyle's 2-year absence that didn't require believing in ancient underground civilizations. Kyle himself seemed strangely at peace with the loss of his brothers and his own extraordinary experience. He established a small research foundation dedicated to studying unexplained geological phenomena and ancient archaeological sites. His work focused on locations where other people had reported encounters with unknown intelligences or experiences of missing time in underground environments. He claimed that the builders had chosen him to identify others who might be capable of receiving their teachings, preparing for a time when their knowledge would be desperately needed by human civilization. 5 years after the incident, Kyle published a book detailing his experience and the knowledge he claimed to have received from the builders. Voices from the Deep Earth became a bestseller in alternative science circles, though it was dismissed by mainstream scientists and archaeologists. Kyle used the proceeds to fund expeditions to remote cave systems around the world, searching for evidence of other builder sites and individuals who might have had similar encounters. The official investigation into the Brennan brothers' disappearance was closed after 6 months, with Derek and Justin's deaths ruled accidental and Kyle's survival attributed to unknown factors that might never be fully understood. The case file was sealed, though Freedom of Information Act requests eventually revealed that several federal agencies had taken interest in the unusual aspects of Kyle's story and the unexplained features of the cave system. Today, Kyle Brennan continues to live quietly in Boulder, teaching mathematics to high school students and pursuing his research into ancient underground civilizations. He rarely gives interviews about his experience, preferring to let his written account speak for itself. Those who know him describe a man who seems to carry profound sadness about the loss of his brothers, but also an unshakable certainty about the reality of what he experienced during those 2 missing years. The cave entrance remains sealed, marked only by a small memorial plaque honoring Derek and Justin Brennan. Local hiking groups avoid the area, partly out of respect for the family's loss and partly due to persistent rumors that strange sounds can still be heard coming from deep underground on quiet nights. The mystery of what really happened to the Brennan brothers during their final mountain adventure may never be fully resolved, leaving behind only Kyle's impossible story and the memories of 2 men who ventured into the earth and never returned. The case serves as a reminder of how much we still don't understand about our own planet and the forces that shape it. Whether Kyle Brennan's account represents genuine contact with ancient intelligences or the most elaborate survival story ever documented, it challenges our assumptions about the limits of human experience and the mysteries that may still be waiting in the deep places of the earth. The truth, whatever it may be, died with Derek and Justin in that strange chamber beneath the mountains, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered and a brother whose story will forever remain beyond the boundaries of accepted reality.